Matt Napolitano, Fox News.
And the lineup is set for the Bonnaroo Music Festival to make a return after being sidelined for 2 years by the pandemic and then bad weather. The event in Tennessee starts June 16th and includes Stevie Nicks, Robert Plant, and 21 Savage. I'm Carmen Roberts, and this is Fox News.
When's the last time you looked at your homeowner's insurance?
An easily overlooked part of covering our home is what's inside of it. Over time, we buy things we don't want to lose, but don't update our contents coverage. The smart thing to do is get the answers and level up our insurance to make sure we're totally protected.
That's the Insurance Extra Point. Get out there and make something good happen today by calling Guahan Insurance Services at 475-1162 or visit us at the Camacho Landmark Center in Tamuning.
Happy day. This is Clara Manglona from Security Title with an important warning. Wire fraud is real, and home buyers and sellers are one of the biggest targets, even on Guam. When sending money by wire transfer, be sure to confirm the wire instructions by phone, not email. In this case, it's good to be suspicious and know who you're dealing with. Let the professionals at Security Title work with you to minimize loss due to wire fraud. We are here to help.
Guam Auto Spot has the best selection in Buick, GMC, Mitsubishi, and used cars like the 2021 Mitsubishi Mirage starting at $127 per paycheck. Zero down. Call 671-478-AUTO to take a test drive or get pre-approved online at GuamAutospot.com.
Welcome to Tall Tales with Bob Klitzkie, the only show on talk radio where common sense is a lot more common. Phone lines are now open at 888-TALK. That's 888-8255. And now, The Point proudly brings you Tall Tales with Senator Bob Klitzkie.
A well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. I say that every day, and I'm going to keep saying it every day because it's important, and it's something that we all need to keep kind of a top-of-the-mind awareness of. Okay, from there I'll go to Zemi Ikotny. And today, both editorials are about really important subjects. Things the government should be giving us. This is really important. Whatever happened to my dream of an effective, efficient government operating within the rule of law, furnishing the basic government services on at least a break-even basis? That sounds like some sort of radical idea, doesn't it? That's not what does. That's not what the government's for. The government's for giving you things, freebies.
Maybe it's because they're still feeling that Christmas spirit.
I suppose.
Gifts everywhere.
Here we go. Our view, White House must ensure insurance costs covered. A ready supply of home test kits. Medical experts and government have made it clear that it's critical that residents get tested for Wuhan virus, especially if they're showing any of the symptoms caused by the virus. Now, there's a sentence for you. Especially if they're showing any of the symptoms. If not, it's okay. Guam offers free drive-through testing now by appointment, and we encourage residents to avail themselves of this service. But far more convenient are at-home Wuhan virus test kits. The Biden administration Tuesday announced that private insurance companies will have to cover the cost of an at-home Wuhan virus test for Americans, up to 8 at-home tests per person in a household, and Guam will be included according to the Office of the Governor. Now, Where does the Biden administration get off telling private insurance companies what they must do? Well, yeah, but the COVID is really serious, so it's okay, right? Yeah, it's just not what the government is supposed to be doing. And so who ultimately winds up paying for what the private insurance companies hand out?
We do.
We do. Insurance and an increase in premiums, I suppose. Unfortunately, according to Frank Campillo, health plan manager of Calvo Select Care, early guidance indicates health insurers will only have to cover a portion of the costs, which can run between $30 and $50. Another issue is that there isn't a ready supply of at-home test kits. Many businesses that sell the kits say they don't have any in stock, so shipments are expected. So what we're looking at here then is that old Democrat tactic called ready, fire, aim. The problem isn't specific to Guam. Retailers across the nation are having supply issues with the test kits, even online merchants. The White House also will provide 500 million Wuhan virus rapid test kits for free via a website that will be delivered by the U.S. Postal Service. So the website's going to be delivered by the U.S. Postal Service? I usually, check my phone or my iPad or my desktop if I want to go to a website. I don't go down to the post office.
Maybe they're starting to deliver email.
That's what it said. The White House will provide 500 million Wuhan virus rapid test kits for free via a website that will be delivered by the U.S. Postal Service. Yeah, nice sentence. But even with the free tests, it will be several more weeks before these kits are available to be shipped. Well, we've only been doing this for 2 years. It takes a while to kind of get caught up on these things. The Biden administration testing plan, which is part of national efforts to combat the high infectious Omicron variant, makes a lot of sense. Oh, yeah, it does. But for it to work at its best, the White House needs to ensure it works with insurance companies to cover the full cost of the test based on individual limits. And once again, isn't that for the insurance companies, isn't that a deprivation of property without due process of law? Saying you got to provide these things for free. It also needs to work with manufacturers to help ramp up production to ensure that at-home Wuhan virus tests are readily available to everyone on Guam and every American. Yeah.
I'm flipping the players of the game here and going to pretend that this is the Trump administration talking about sending out tests. And Kamala Harris, the vice president candidate, go, I won't trust anything that administration puts out.
Absolutely not. Anything that's got Donald Trump connected with it, I don't trust it. Yeah.
We're supposed to trust the process and not the person now.
And remember, she talked about the senator that opposed busing, and a little girl had to ride the bus in California.
Was that her running mate?
And that little girl was me. And when she stepped off the stage, Jill Biden, that would be Dr. Jill Biden, kind of let Kamala Harris have it with a kind of a let's go Brandon type response. Yeah, it's a lovely group of people. Another unfortunate thing about Joe Biden is that he's giving old people a bad name. That's what old people are like him? Whoa. I don't think we need any of those guys around here. Okay, next we have the Post. Federal money to help students' families buy food should not be delayed. Free tests, free food, bread, circuses. One thing is certain for Guam residents who have lived here for any length of time. Food on Guam has become very, very expensive. compared to many places in the States with big box grocery stores that offer lower prices and fresher products. You know, I'm going to have to stick up for Payless. I think, given where we are, the process of shipping everything in, etc., I think Payless does a really good job of having a good assortment of fresh, really good food. And as far as their prices are concerned, I don't pay that much attention to it. I don't do that much shopping. But, you know, Payless is in business to make a profit, not to be a charitable organization. A loaf of bread at $4 to $6 is nearly double to triple its price several years ago. A gallon of milk goes for nearly $9, or double what it once sold for. And eggs and chilled meat prices are nearly 50% above retail prices several years ago. Just to name a few examples. Well, I can't think of anything except high-tech stuff that doesn't cost more today than it did several years ago. The only thing that keeps getting cheaper is electronics. And there's a good reason for that. Last year on Guam, more than 21,000 pandemic electronic benefit transfers, or PEBT debit cards, were issued to help stave off hunger when tens of thousands of Guam students were unable to avail, it should say themselves, to avail themselves. They left out the word themselves, of free meals during the lockdowns and school closures. It was a lifeline then, and will also serve the same benefit this year if the government of Guam can finally release years. This, I think they're trying to say, this year's PEBT cards. As of earlier this week, we can't get an answer as to when the cards will be released or when the existing cards will be reloaded with food money. Children who would have received free or reduced price meals under the National School Lunch Act if their schools were not closed or operating with reduced hours or attendance for at least 5 consecutive days are eligible to receive the cards, according to the Department of Agriculture. The cards also provide benefits to younger children in households participating in the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, also known as SNAP, what we used to call food stamps. How many cards a family received depended on how many of their children were enrolled in GDOE schools during those periods. Some parents recently told the Post that they were about $50 away from running out of PEBT money for buying food. Others have run out. The local government needs to hurry with a distribution plan that will get this food money in the hands of families that need it without further delay. You know, it's interesting. They've taken a 2-paragraph editorial and stretched it out to 3 pages. And without really saying much of anything except the cards are late. All right, so much for Demi Cotney. Not very exciting or elucidating today. Okay, before I go on to the card, I have another Joe on inflation. Yeah. Tell me about inflation, another Joe.
Yeah, Bob. I think you were talking about the cost of everyday living products being more expensive.
I was.
Well, I would suggest that just within the past year, that we noticed it because it's not just a pandemic. Under Trump, there was the cost of fuel was going down. I mean, they were practically giving away barrels of oil because there was way too much supply, and people couldn't figure out what to do with it. So I mean, if I knew that was going to happen again in the near future, my suggestion would be, hey, find a way to store all this extra barrels of oil and buy up all the excess supply worldwide in the U.S. and store it, because it'll be a gold mine. But once it starts going up again. But yeah, I blame Biden, because if we could get, I'd say if we could get the barrel of oil down below $40 a barrel, and if we could get the gallon of gas between $2 and $3, and maybe even between $1 and $2 stateside, I think it'll take a lot of the cost of fuel. Obviously, will be lower, and people can get their products at a lower rate, cost, and therefore they won't have to charge as much. That's just my thought. Bob.
Well, good thought. Another, Joe. You know, the price of gasoline affects the price of an awful lot of other things, because an awful lot of commerce depends on being on trucks or cars, either diesel fuel or gasoline. So when those costs go up, everything else is going to go up. And then
sorry.
We decided, you know, way back when I was like a teenager, that 2% inflation every year was good for the economy, which I think is really a dumb idea. I think we'd be much better off with a stable currency, because, you know, back say in 1974, I remember 1974, I was in my last year of law school, and I made $12,000. That was a lot of money back in those days, $12,000. You can't even buy a used car for $12,000 nowadays, you know, a good one. So that's where we are, right? Another, Joe?
And in that spirit of cabal, we're on the same page. I say, go, Brandon.
Let's go, Brandon.
Hey, Bob, thanks for your time.
Okay, good talking to you, another, Joe. Okay, so our in-house economist here, another Joe, calls in and talks about inflation. Let's go to the card, and this is what I've got on the card today. Of course, I start out with Paul Zerzan versus systemic racism, and then I've got on the card Moray versus the fence. I said that I would keep it on the card just to keep track of it. No news today, so I won't be discussing it. However, what I'd really like to find would be a tall tales reporter, someone who is in the JFK area every day about the time school gets out, who would call and tell us, you know, kind of like Ray does with traffic, how many jaywalkers there are, how many pedestrians got run over by traffic, etc. So if you're a tailgater and you happen to be around JFK every day at the end of school, we'd really like to have your help on that one. I also kept cops versus quasi drive-through Jack on the calendar today, and I don't have much to say about it. Kind of a slow day. No one decided to drive his car into a building today. And, Jerry Kitchen, the retirement fund, KFC, all seem to be relatively safe today. Okay, and then I've got Bavacqua versus Manny Cruz. And Manny Cruz, that's a takeoff on Manny Cruz versus Bavacqua. And then Tranny versus Tranny. Just when you think you've seen everything, something else comes along to surprise you.
We're not talking car talk.
No, we're not. That's what tranny used to be.
The Hemi versus.
Yeah. You know, I was pulling out fast, and I speed shifted, and I dropped the tranny. Really? What did they say? And I've got McCarthy versus the January 6th committee, McConnell versus Brandon, Tall Tales versus Separatists, and some things that have been on the card for quite a while. Okay, you remember Paul Zerzan and systemic racism, the flap when Paul Zerzan came along and said that this rather common food on Guam is not red, it's orange. What we call red rice is really orange, and the Daily News came roaring back saying, Readers to Zerzan, leave our rice alone. A story by Therese Padua Howe. And I use that as an allegory to show the interplay between the narrative and the truth. The narrative is that rice is red, and if you don't get on the right side of it, we're going to beat up on you. You may even be canceled. That's the narrative. The truth is that the rice is actually orange. And I made up this sign to kind of demonstrate how this all works. You can see that that the letters in number 2, the letters are orange, but the word is red. So the word is the narrative, the color of the letters is the truth. And we see that all the time where there is a narrative usually propounded by the left, and the narrative need not have any relationship to the facts or the truth at all. But woe be to the person who strays away from the requirements of the narrative. Okay, let's move on here. Yeah, I also have, I forgot to mention it, I've got, and I never know how to pronounce this. Is it Tatuha? Tatuha or Tatua?
I think all of the above.
All of the above. Tatuha. 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 Tatua versus Vista Del Mar.
Ooh.
Uh-huh. And there's a long article that I talked about the other day about Vista Del Mar. This is this extremely expensive resort that some developers want to build at the foot of Two Lovers Point. And of course, the environmental wackos have come out against it. But the hybrid committee couldn't make a decision dealing with that matter when they had, let's see, they met on, I don't have the date, but it was last week. They couldn't go forward because a planned hearing of the GLUC Hybrid Commission was canceled after officials felt a required resolution from the Tumun-Harmon Municipal Planning Council was passed during an improperly noticed meeting. Yeah, so we know how that works, right? So everything had to stop because if you do something at an improperly noticed meeting, it's void. Well, they sure learned their lesson, right?
Denied.
Yeah, wrong. Because I have the notice.
They went through with it?
No, I have the notice for the meeting that they're now having because they couldn't go forward with the last one. And it starts, it's Roman numerals, call to order, roll call, recitation of the Pledge of Allegiance and the Infresi, approval of minutes of December 9, Mayor's Report, Mayor's Council, Guam Land Use Commission application number 2020-31A, etc. Guam Land Use Commission application 2020-31B, that's the one we're talking about. So 5, B, C, and D all deal with the Vista Del Mar. Then Roman numeral 6, Sister Command Report. Roman numeral 7, Youth Congress Representative Report. And then item number 8, Old Business.
You know what's old business?
Put
in old business.
Yeah, old business. Old businesses means making the same mistake again. That's old business. And Roman numeral 9, new business. And Roman numeral 10, committee reports. So, the same thing is going to happen again. And if any of the environmental wackos are listening right now, they have the ability to throw a gigantic monkey wrench into this next hybrid council meeting, because anything that comes from the Tattoo Myers Council is void. Once again, from the law, notices must contain the agenda of matters to be discussed at the respective meeting. Agenda items must be in sufficient detail to put the public on notice as to what is to be discussed. Yeah, does the word old business tell you anything at all? Old business, and then it has to be 1, 2, 3, 4.
Is that where the Manumco get to talk?
Yeah, old business, right. Yeah, and then add Section 3 of the public law, which added a new 8103.1 to 5 GCA, we have action voided, non-compliance. Any action of a public agency taken at a meeting is void and of no effect if the public agency failed to comply with the public notice of agenda matters to be discussed pursuant to 8107D of this chapter. So you'd think that people would start catching on to this, especially after Tattoo screwed it up once. You'd think they would take the time to do it right this time, but I guess not. Let's take a break, Jose.
The Extra Point with Jerry Roberts of Guam Training.
Hi, I'm Jerry Roberts, and every day on The Ray Gibson Show, I get to comment on the incredibly diverse, fun, challenging, sometimes frustrating, often exciting, but always interesting world of work. I hope you'll be there with us.
You can find daily transcripts of The Extra Point at guamtraining.com. Tune in every weekday morning at 7:20 for The Extra Point with Jerry Roberts. Brought to you by Guahan Insurance Services and First Hawaiian Bank on 93.3 The Point.
The Eat Fresh Refresh goes on at Subway. You've tried the Cali Fresh steak. Now you can enjoy the Cali Fresh turkey. One of only 2 Cali Fresh subs. The Cali Fresh turkey is packed with deli-thin, oven-roasted turkey piled high on a bed of hickory smoked bacon, smashed avocado, and fresh mozzarella. Crafted for premium freshness, the Cali Fresh turkey is made on freshly baked, hearty, multi-grain bread with your choice of fresh veggies hand-sliced daily in restaurants. Treat yourself to a Cali Fresh turkey today. Subway. Eat fresh.
Is it time to sell a new car? Nope, it's time to sell a used car from Nissan Guam. They have what they refer to as certified pre-owned vehicle. Their used cars aren't just washed and then stuck on a lot. Nissan Guam carefully inspects and repairs each one inside out before it earns a spot in their certified pre-owned inventory. A full 32-point inspection is done. Vehicles undergo repairs and replacement of things like belts, air filters, coolant, transmission fluid, engine oil, plenty of stuff. And once they're up to their roadworthy standards, then they're fully detailed inside and out. You know, I pity the guy that has to detail mine, because there's sand everywhere. There's sand and receipts and all kinds of other stuff. Used car manager Marlon Laxon prices the vehicles below Kelley Blue Book. They've got a diverse inventory, and you're sure to find the perfect used car for your lifestyle and budget. For the complete inventory, go online at nissanguam.com.
We now return to Tall Tales with Bob Klitzkie, soaring over the confusion with his superpowers of truth. Call 888-TALK. That's 888-8255.
Next on the card, we've got Bavacqua versus Manny Cruz. Before I get into that, I want to talk a little bit about Bavacqua's column in today's Daily News. It's actually going to be in tomorrow's Daily News. It's in today's online. And he talks about his uncle, David De Leon Flores, who passed away at the age of 95. And he asked David De Leon Flores about the first Constitutional Convention, which I remember. I was here paying attention to it. I remember it.
Maybe he should talk to you.
Oh, no, he would never do that. Because he wouldn't be able to make up stuff that I said. People would know better. Then he goes on to say, I asked him about his reflections on Guam's political status and about the first Constitutional Convention. And then he says, this gathering wasn't authorized by the federal government. Yeah, now, is that just, kind of a slip, or is it part of the same gaslighting approach?
Yeah,
like they're doing something wrong. That wasn't authorized by the federal government, right?
Those rebels.
Yeah. And from reading the proceedings, it wasn't clear that those gathered wanted more than to just be a marginal, unincorporated territory, but we're not sure what could or could not be done. Probably right. Neither do you, Michael Boacqua. They ended up with a list of recommendations for changes to the Organic Act, few of which were taken up by Congress. My uncle admitted that it was frustrating but enlightening experience. He going on down, he says, then we leave David de Leon Flores behind and we're back to Boacqua. Federal indifference and ignorance persisted. Sentence before that, as they began to rebuild, they kept hitting walls. Federal indifference and ignorance persisted, despite Chamorros now being U.S. citizens. Well, that's a nice sentence. Despite the fact that Chamorros are now U.S. citizens, federal indifference and ignorance persisted. That's good. Until 1962, there was still a U.S.-imposed security clearance for the island that inhibited travel and economic progress. Now, here's the story on the security clearance. The security clearance was put in before World War II, the security clearance requirement by FDR. And the reason was that we had Japanese troops 40 miles to the north. And at the time that the security clearance was put into place, I think there was a pretty good chance that people understood that the situation was getting pretty dangerous. And the security clearance lasted until after the war, and the reason that it was kept in place until 1962, according to Robert Rogers, a real historian who wrote a book called Destiny's Landfill, the reason that the security clearance was kept in place was not because of what was going on here, but what was going on in Saipan. In Saipan, the Navy built all of the improvements on what is now called Capitol Hill, if you've ever been up there. Yeah, the office building, there's some really nice houses up there, etc. The Navy built those, and the northern half of Saipan was off limits to civilians because it was a Navy base on Capitol Hill called the Naval Technical Training Unit. That was its theoretical name. But it was actually a CIA operation. And the purpose of that CIA operation was to train Chinese from Taiwan for the reinvasion of the mainland. Yeah. So, for strategic reasons, the U.S. government didn't want anybody poking around into the Naval Technical Training Unit. So their answer was to just leave that security clearance statute or rule in place. And what it meant was that if you lived here and you were going to leave, you had to get a re-entry permit or you might not be able to come back, even if you were Chamorro and had lived here all your life. So it was a pretty draconian measure. And needless to say, it really stifled commerce. But that's the reason that it was put in place. There were also examples of the U.S. federal government intervening to weaken or shut down local attempts at building up industries because of how they were seen as competing with U.S. companies. Now, if you go back to 1970 in the gubernatorial campaign and some of the speeches that Richard Titano made, he would tell you about the Guam Commercial Corporation. also known as the Guam Cocoa Party Association, according to Richard. And the Guam Commercial Corporation was not a Navy enterprise, but it was started with the encouragement of the Navy. And the purpose of starting the Guam Commercial Corporation was to break the monopolistic power of 5 big families on Guam. Families like Calvo, Torres, Martinez. Yeah, so that was the idea.
Loosely affiliated here.
Yeah. And at the time, civilian products came to Guam on Navy bottoms. So in 1948, Mr. Wonpat said, I don't think we should shoot for citizenship yet. We should work on improving the economy. Now, Mr. Wonpat was part of the Guam Commercial Corporation, the Guam Cocoa Party Association. And the Berdallo Titano ticket, Ricardo Berdallo wasn't. Now, of course, Berdallo was one of the 5 big families. And they really laid it on Manny Guerrero, who was their chief opponent, who was in the Guam Commercial Corporation. So, that's not the kind of history that Bavacqua is interested in. He's more interested in something like this. There were also examples of the U.S. federal government intervening to weaken or shut down local attempts at building up industries. It's just the opposite of what I told you. In a positive sense, being in an unincorporated territory meant that while there was always the possibility to gain access to certain sources of federal funding, programs like food stamps and student loans, these funds also could be used to support populations and projects. The sentence doesn't make any sense. These funds also could be used to support populations and projects. So, in a more restrictive sense, it also meant that developing Guam to always remain within the limit of how the U.S. saw the island and what it allowed. The first Constitutional Convention was meant to explore the status quo and see how it could be improved or what could be done. Now, here's something, again, that he's not going to mention. One of the things that was discussed at that convention was the possibility of petitioning the United States government and the state of Hawaii to make Guam a county of Hawaii. Solves all your problems. You can vote, senators, representatives, vote for president, etc. That didn't get much support, that idea. Well, every delegate who attended was happy to be under the U.S. flag. They were also confronted with the reality that being a territory under that flag didn't provide as much freedom or liberty as they might have hoped. As my Uncle David reflected late one night, how can you be self-governing if you don't control your borders, can't control your economy, and can't write your own constitution? Well, good point. Control of borders. The Northern Marianas had control of their borders. Is at least theoretically possible that we could have the same deal that the Northern Marianas had to control immigration, provided that we didn't screw it up as bad as they did. Control our economy. In a capitalistic system, governments don't control the economy.
They allow it to work.
Exactly. And he also said, and can't write your own constitution. Well, of course, we've had the ability to write our own constitution since 1978. But the separatists are adamantly opposed to writing a constitution. Okay, let's take a short break and we'll come back to Bavacqua versus Manny Cruz.
Come try Guam's original Chamorro restaurant with Pica's best 5 years running. Mezcla Chamorro Fusion Bistro. Experience Chef Peter's candied salmon over scallion coconut rice, octopus to naktak, Chamorro platter, and their award-winning gourmet hamburgers. Or if you're looking for something healthy, try their keto-friendly menu. Come and enjoy Mezcla's half-a-day service at their Hagåtña and Grand Plaza Tuman location. Call their Hagåtña location at 479-2652 for reservations.
Listen to The Point anytime, anywhere on Odyssey. Odyssey is your new audio home for all the music, news, sports, and podcasts that matter to you. Find your favorite stations like The Point and discover more. Music stations, local and trusted news sources, sports talk and team coverage, plus today's biggest podcasts. Find it all on the Odyssey app. AUDACY.
All right, so here we go. Yesterday, Manny Cruz, a longtime popular figure in Guam, a very well-known guy, ran for Washington, ran for the legislature, has been the director of labor, was the business rep for American Federation of Government Employees. Really took on Michael Lujan Bavacqua in a letter to the editor where he said Bavacqua insulted the Catholic Church. And Manny made it very clear that he's not going to stand for that, winding up his letter saying, I, for one, as a Chamorro and a Catholic, will always challenge him at every turn. In fact, I will challenge anyone who dares to rewrite the history of Guam, to cancel Chamorro culture and practices, and to teach critical race theories to our children and people. Well, you know, I've pointed out before that the tactics that the separatists use are the same tactics that the CRT folks use. You take a historical incident, you pretend that it happened yesterday, you ascribe a reason for it, like for the CRT folks, it's systemic racism. Here it's the evil of colonialism. And you say it'll never change unless we change the system. And this change of the system means independent from the United States. So it's very similar to the CRT approach to public persuasion. So that's what ran. And then yesterday, somebody gave me something from Facebook. I don't know exactly the genesis of it. I don't spend any time on Facebook except here on the show where it's part of the show. I've only got one Facebook friend because you have to have one Facebook friend to open a page. And I don't spend any time on Facebook except on the show, which is a lot. And I really appreciate the folks that post on Facebook. It's an important part of the show. But this is what someone scraped off Facebook and gave to me. It's from Bavacqua. It is always a pleasure to have a rambling, incoherent letter to the editor of the Daily News, especially from my biggest fan, Senor Manny Cruz. In this letter, Senor Cruz takes issue with a column I wrote a few weeks ago talking about how through legends such as Santa Maria and Camelin and the Carabao on the Christmas Eve, we can see the ways in which Chamorro identity and culture became blended with Catholicism. Senor Cruz was clearly triggered by my column and penned this response. I sincerely wish that Senor Cruz would actually read my column and understand it prior to attempting to write a response. Little ad hominem attack here, you know, goes a long way. Rambling, incoherent letter, should have read my column. He clearly either doesn't understand what I said or doesn't care about what I was saying and just wants to express what he feels and make up things to justify it. Oh, I think that's what Bavacqua does. It's truly unfortunate. For instance, he attacks me for something written by the late Tan Remedios Paris, not apparently understanding that it was a legend that Chamorros told to connect to the Nativity, to make it feel like the story was more their own, Nice structure here. He doesn't seem to understand that while I am analyzing the story, I didn't come up with it. He also seems to not understand that the history he is attacking me for is simply the history. His interpretation is wildly at odds with basic facts. He may wish it was different, but history is different to our feelings or wishes, is indifferent to our feelings or wishes. As someone who has criticized me for, quote, cherry-picking history in just a short, incoherent response, he does enough of this to start his own cherry fruit stand. You know, if the Guam Museum ever closed, this guy could for sure get a job as a writer in Hollywood with his ability to turn phrases like that, right? Senor Cruz is clearly a proud Catholic, but he's attempting to impose the way he sees the world and the way he wishes it was on Chamorro history, which is laughable. The process by which Chamorros as a people accepted Christianity took generations, and there was a great deal of resistance and outright fighting. If Senor Cruz had read my column and understood it, then he would have seen that the story of the Carabao in the Belen is one of the ways that we can see how Chamorros began to accept Catholicism, because it stopped feeling so foreign to them, but they could now see themselves in it. I am saddened to see one of our elders working his hardest to deny basic facts from this island's history. I don't know how to spell this, but here's my comment, Jose. Ho-hum. You know, instead of quote, setting the record straight, if he thought that Manny Cruz was not stating the proper historical information, he just took a lot of cheap shots at Manny Cruz, all in the name of public education, right?
It's interesting how the same paragraph that chides somebody for doing something is the device of this entire written piece. I just don't, it's almost like, is this meant to be ironic?
Yeah, because he comes back and does the same thing himself. Exactly, yeah. Okay, we're getting up pretty close to that big halftime show here. Next, I've got tranny versus tranny. And Jose and I were talking a little earlier. When I was growing up, the word tranny was short for transmission. You know? Yeah, I put a new tranny in my 62 Ford. It's stick shift. I don't like automatics, so I put a new tranny in it. But,
so many innuendo in that, Bob.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, but now a tranny is a transsexual, someone who is born with either male or female plumbing, but deep inside his or her heart, actually their heart, they feel like they're the opposite. So sometimes they go through what they call sex reassignment surgery, and sometimes they just dress as though they had the plumbing that they really desired. All you have to do is, if you are born with male plumbing and you really, really want to be a female, all you got to do is start dressing like a female, etc., and vice versa. So we've had transsexuals, men, participating in female sports. And this is, I know, a complete sacrilege to the folks on the far left. But men and women are different, even beyond the plumbing differences. Men are usually stronger than women. They're usually bigger than women. They're usually faster than women. So if you put men and women, have men and women competing in the same sports event, the men are going to win most of the events. And of course, some opportunists decided, well, that's great because I'm a man and I'm a pretty good swimmer, but if I were a woman, I'd be a top-notch swimmer. So here we go. Penn's transgender swimmer lost to Yale's transgender swimmer in a hotly contested women's Ivy League 100-meter race. Penn transgender swimmer Leah Thomas, who's a man, who had been crushing her competition since joining the women's swim team after 3 years swimming as a biological male, met her match Saturday in the 100-meter freestyle during a tri-meet with Yale at Dartmouth. Thomas won the 200-meter and 500-meter races at Penn's final home meet of the season, but she finished sixth in the 100-meter, where Yale's Isaac Hennick, a transgender swimmer who is in the process of transitioning from female to male, crushed Thomas. Hennick finished the 100 in 49.57, while Thomas touched the wall in 52.84. Quote, "I wasn't prepared for that. Everything is messed up. I can't wrap my head around this. The NCAA needs to do something about this. They need to put science into the decision and discussion," a Penn swim parent told the Daily Mail. And the NCAA has done something. They've condoned this madness. In the 400 freestyle relay, Thomas was beaten yet again by Hennick, who swam his leg in 50.45 to Thomas' 51.94. Spectators in attendance told the Daily Mail that Hennick, who had his breasts removed, won the 50-yard freestyle and proceeded to pull down the top of his swimsuit. In June, Hennick wrote in New York Times column that he wasn't taking hormones and would remain on the women's team. Now, the ironic thing about this is that if you want to do this, you have to take various kinds of hormones. If you're a man and you want to compete as a woman, I think you have to take estrogen to set off the testosterone, etc. Now, if any athlete takes steroids, that's a career ender. We're doing this all over the place for not anywhere near as good a reason as people take the steroids. In June, Hennick wrote in a New York Times column that he wasn't taking hormones and would remain on the women's team. As a student athlete, coming out as a trans guy put me in a weird position. I could start hormones to align more with myself. Or wait, transition socially and keep competing on a women's swim team. I decided on the latter, Hennick wrote. Yeah. It's kind of like Vanessa Williams and her Impossible Choices. I don't know when I should start taking the hormones and start competing like a man, right? I value my contributions to the team and recognize that my boyhood doesn't hinge on whether there's more or less testosterone running through my veins. His boyhood. At least that's what I'll try to remember when I put on the women's swimsuit for the competition and am reminded of a self I no longer feel attached to. Poor guy. I mean, poor gal.
I thought what's good for the goose is good for the gander.
We've got to get Ernest Chargoloff here to rule on that one. Yeah. As for Thomas, who has already qualified for 2 events at the NCAA championships, spectators at Saturday's tri-meet described the odds-on favorite to win the national championships for Penn as coasting and barely trying during the 500 freestyle, which was won by a 1-second margin. Yeah, I'm going to come back to this just for a minute after the big halftime show. Okay, let's take a break for the halftime show.
The Point is KUSG, Hagåtña, Guam, 93.3 FM and 104.3 HD3.
The White House fires back. I'm Carmen Roberts, Fox News. The White House standing up to criticism of the president's speech on voting rights this week.
There's a night and day difference between fomenting an insurrection based on lies totally debunked by 80 judges, including Trump-appointed ones, and election authorities across the country, and making objective, true statements.
Press Secretary Jen Psaki says the president spoke out about a coordinated effort to undermine Americans' constitutional right to vote. But Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell called the president's speech on Tuesday unpresidential.
The president repeatedly invoked the January 6th riot, while himself using irresponsible, delegitimizing rhetoric.
House Republican leader Kevin McCarthy blasting the House committee investigating the Capitol riot as not legitimate, says he won't cooperate with it. Committee Chairman Democrat Benny Thompson says members want to hear about McCarthy's conversations with then-President Trump before, during, and after the riot. Los Angeles police arrest 4 people in connection with the murder of an off-duty officer.
27-year-old Fernando Arroyos was shot and killed during an armed robbery attempt in South L.A. Authorities say Arroyos was not in uniform and was with his girlfriend to look at a home they were interested in buying when 3 men pulled up in a black pickup truck, confronting the couple in what police believe was an attempted armed robbery.
Mario Ramirez with Fox 11 L.A. And the music world loses a 60s icon. Ronnie Spector, who sang this and other classic hits, dies at 78 after a brief battle with cancer. America's listening to Fox News.
Listen to The Point anytime, anywhere on Odyssey. Odyssey is your new audio home for all the music, news, sports, and podcasts that matter to you. Find your favorite stations like The Point and discover more. Music stations, local and trusted news sources, sports talk and team coverage, plus today's biggest podcasts. Find it all on the Odyssey app. AUDACY.
Howdy, Chili's is serving y'all some Texas-sized family meal, because everything's bigger in Texas. Enjoy full racks of Chili's world-famous baby back ribs, margarita chicken, savory shrimp, beef fajita, smoked jalapeno sausages, mashed potatoes, and corn on the cob. Man, this meal's bigger than else, but it ain't breaking the bank. Chili's has Texas-sized family meals for just $45 to feed your crew of 3 to 6 folks. For your youngins, just add $5 for a kid's meal. Chili's, more life and bigger meals happen here. News.
A mother and daughter duo are the latest to plead guilty for their roles in the January 6th riot.
Connecticut mom Jean Lavin and her 20-year-old daughter Carla both admitted in court Tuesday to breaching the U.S. Capitol on January 6th. The pair were first arrested in September as part of the FBI's sweeping probe to round up Trump supporters who took part in last year's riot. Carla had initially posted pictures of the two inside the Capitol on Facebook, but later removed them. As part of an agreement, the pair will pay a $500 fine. More than 600 others are facing federal charges following the riot. So far, some have been sentenced to years behind bars. Tom Graham, Fox News.
The Ohio Supreme Court strikes down the state's Republican-approved redistricting maps, ruling they don't meet the constitutional standards against partisan gerrymandering. the court ordering the state to redraw the maps within 10 days. A major league team makes baseball history.
Rachel Balkovitz made history Wednesday after being introduced as the new manager of the New York Yankees' low-A minor league ball club, the Tampa Tarpons, making Balkovitz the first woman to serve as manager in the history of affiliated baseball. However, she did note in her press conference she knows the negativity is out there. She's just shrugging it off.
That's how I kind of deal with the negativity or anything that I hear coming my way. It's hilarious to me because it's the American dream.
Balkovitz is no stranger to breaking the glass ceiling in baseball through the Yankees organization. She was the first woman to serve as a full-time minor league strength and conditioning coach, then the first to become a full-time hitting coach in the minors. Matt Napolitano, Fox News.
And the lineup is set for the Bonnaroo Music Festival to make a return after being sidelined for 2 years by the pandemic and then bad weather. The event in Tennessee starts June 16th and includes Stevie Nicks, Robert Plant, and 21 Savage. I'm Carmen Roberts, and this is Fox News.
Come try Guam's original Chamorro restaurant with Pica's best 5 years running. Mezcla Chamorro Fusion Bistro. Experience Chef Peter's candied salmon over scallion coconut rice, octopus to naktak, Chamorro platter, and their award-winning gourmet hamburgers. Or if you're looking for something healthy, try their keto-friendly menu. Come and enjoy Mezcla's half-a-day service at their Hagåtña and Grand Plaza Tuman location. Call their Hagåtña location at 479-2652 for reservations.
When's the last time you looked at your homeowner's insurance?
An easily overlooked part of covering our home is what's inside of it. Over time, we buy things we don't want to lose, but don't update our contents coverage. The smart thing to do is get the answers and level up our insurance to make sure we're totally protected.
That's the Insurance Extra Point. Get out there and make something good happen today by calling Guahan Insurance Services at 475-1162 or visit us at the Camacho Landmark Center in Tamuning.
Half a day. This is Clara Manglona from Security Title with an important warning. Wire fraud is real, and home buyers and sellers are one of the biggest targets, even on Guam. When sending money by wire transfer, be sure to confirm the wire instructions by phone, not email. In this case, it's good to be suspicious and know who you're dealing with. Let the professionals at Security Title work with you to minimize loss due to wire fraud. We are here to help.
Guam Auto Spot has the best selection in Buick, GMC, Mitsubishi, and used cars like the 2021 Mitsubishi Mirage starting at $127 per paycheck. Zero down. Call 671-478-AUTO to take a test drive or get pre-approved online at guamautospot.com.
So another great halftime show here on Tall Tales. That takes us into the second half of Tall Tales for today. And I'm just finishing up here with tranny versus tranny. When you read something like this, when I read something like this, I got to ask myself, is the whole country gone crazy to take things like this seriously? That you can have a women's swimming meet with a man enrolled in it, and then somebody else that wants to be a man who shares with us his hormone regime to go from being a woman to being a man. It just...
Please let that be Alan Funt coming around the corner.
Really? Yeah. Candid camera, right? Yeah. Yeah, it just seems like when we get to the point where things are as crazy as they possibly can be, something more crazy comes along. Bonnie Suba chimes in and she says, don't forget there's a group of pedophiles waiting to pass a bill that allows pedophilia as a sexual preference. They're using the argument that if men and women can have sexual preferences, such as LGBTQ, then pedophiles are being discriminated against. They're screaming equality and not being inclusive. The gates of hell have opened. I'm afraid that Bonnie's right.
She might have. I can't remember if it was the Washington Post or not. Most likely was an article or an op-ed citing that pedophilia isn't necessarily abuse. Not all child sexual abuses are pedophilics. Now, we also know that because of this church scandal, that there's a difference between pedophilia and pedophilia. Pedophilia being the
there's
molestation of children prepubescent.
Yeah, that's pedophilia, and then there's ephebophilia, which is post-pubescent.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. But trying to designate themselves as mainstream or it is scary.
It really is. And given the left's ability to convince people that crazy ideas are not that crazy after all, it is really scary.
Relativity, that's the word. Everything is relative.
That's right. There are no hard and fast rules of morality. Okay, so much for that. Penn's transgender swimmer lost to Yale's transgender swimmer. I'm so happy for them. Okay, let me just check and see who we got waiting in the green room here. I've got Kellis and the most dangerous man in the room. And let's see, Kellis, I'll just put them on here and find out what they want to talk about. Go for it, Carl.
Hey, Bob. Good afternoon.
Sir.
This won't be long. I just want to make a brief observation. It's not really. I wish I could claim it like mine. I keep claiming other people's observations, like the one I brought up a few times from Daryl Taggarty. But isn't this, this swim meet where a biological male competed against another biological male and won, aren't the proponents of this accepting this, aren't they basically advancing what do you call this, male, I'm trying to think of the word.
Superiority?
Patriarchy, the patriarchy. Aren't they advancing the patriarchy by doing this? They're kind of proving that men do everything better, including being women.
Yeah, you wonder when the feminazis are going to say enough. We didn't do all of this stuff so that men could come in and take over all the stuff that we're doing here.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So all I have to say is, yay, go patriarchy.
Okay.
That's my only observation, Bob. I'll keep listening.
No wonder he's the most dangerous man in the room. And we got Kellis, other acceptable deviations. Go ahead, Kellis.
Hey, Judge. So because I remember reading those silly laws that are still on the books. I think one of them might have been in Texas or it might have been in Louisiana. It was illegal to have sex with a duck. So are we going to have bestiality as an LGBT? Put another BB?
Well,
along with the P?
When Sabina Paris passed her Comprehensive Pause Act, it did criminalize bestiality. So obviously we're kind of behind the power curve there, aren't we, Kellis?
That's what I'm sitting there thinking about. If we can legalize absolutely everything, I think we got to pull that out. I think that was a law about chicken fighting. Being nice, or no, it's for dogs. To say abuse of dogs, and they just threw bestiality in there also.
Yeah.
But I think that shows a insensitivity to people that are prone that way.
Well, not to mention discriminating against the ducks.
Yes. Because what if a duck wants to have an adult human partner?
Yeah, it's just not fair, is it, Kellis?
It is not.
And it makes as much sense as all of the other stuff that we're being bombarded with nowadays, doesn't it?
Well, I mean, it's just the problem that I see it, Judge, that you and I and a few other people on Guam are insensitive to the needs of the many, evidently.
Yeah.
Because, the way these laws are being written is that a majority of people are, transgendered and whatnot, not a tiny, slight minority.
Yeah. Everyone should take a transgender to lunch at least once a week, right, Kellis?
Well, I don't think we have that many on Guam, so it happened pretty. If you're trans, you'd get a lot of free meals.
Okay, thanks for sharing, Kellis.
Okay, Judge. Bye.
Good points as usual. All right, moving on to a national scene. This is Kevin McCarthy versus the January 6th committee. And I got a lot to say about the January 6th committee. House Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy said Wednesday evening that he will not cooperate with the select committee investigating the January 6, 2021 riot at the Capitol, asserting the panel is not conducting a legitimate investigation. I'm just going to stop there and say he may very well be right. Because, we're so used to oversight hearings and congressional investigations and things like that, we think, well, yeah, that's what the legislature does. The only purpose that a legislature can have for having oversight hearings or conducting investigations is to gain the necessary facts to put together appropriate legislation. The legislature is not some kind of a super grand jury that goes out and finds criminal activity and turns it over to a prosecutor for prosecution. So if it's clear that the legislative committee is not involved in gaining facts upon which it could base proper legislation, then it is not a legitimate investigation.
Like the Warren Commission, that's an investigation of a crime, right?
Yeah.
But it wasn't a legislative.
No, it wasn't. It was a
commission.
Presidential commission, and even that, putting the Chief Justice on that violated the separation of powers. Chief Justice Earl Warren was the chairman of the commission, but those who commented on it said, well, one of the most credible people in the country at that time was Earl Warren. And the historical revisionists are saying, it was really important that the public have faith in the theory that there was just one nut that did the assassination and not some kind of conspiracy, CIA conspiracy, Cuban mafia, communist, whatever. So there was a rush to judgment. They knew what the answer was. It just took them a while to put together the necessary papers to describe the result that they'd foreordained. That's some of the criticism of the Warren Commission. Okay, so McCarthy said in a statement released hours after the committee asked him to voluntarily cooperate with its probe, he maintained that the illegitimate panel was seeking to interview him about private conversations not remotely related to the violence that unfolded at the Capitol. I guess he doesn't know how to say, I can't talk about it. It's a personnel matter. Rory, get on the phone and call Kevin McCarthy. Give him some pointers about personnel matters. The panel noted in its letter to McCarthy earlier Wednesday, however, that the GOP leader previously acknowledged speaking with former President Trump as the attack on the Capitol was underway. McCarthy, in his statement Wednesday night, knocked the committee for subpoenas it has issued and criticized lawmakers for holding individuals in contempt of Congress. He also slammed Speaker Nancy Pelosi for rejecting two of his nominees to the January 6th committee last year. GOP reps Jim Jordan of Ohio and Jim Banks of Indiana, writing that the panel is not serving any legislative purpose. Pelosi rejected the two GOP picks in July after Democrats raised objections to the Trump allies being on the panel. If you aren't going to be anti-Trump, we don't want you on this panel. Objectivity? No. Citing concerns over the impact of their appointments may have on the integrity of the investigation. She later appointed Representatives Lynn Cheney and Adam Kinzinger, two GOP critics of Trump, to the committee. And I've told you this before, Jose, but you know the two things I really don't like about Liz Cheney? Her face. As a representative and leader of the minority party, it is with neither regret nor satisfaction that I have concluded to not participate with the Select Committee's abuse of power that stains this institution today and will harm it going forward. So what you have there with that January 6th committee, they already know what the answer is, or what the answer that they want is, and they haven't been able to put it all together. But the whole purpose of the committee is to tie Trump into the riot at the Capitol. That's the only reason they're doing it. When everybody who's looked at it, the FBI and everybody else, Department of Justice, will tell you the same thing I told you, that what happened was there was an unruly mob that came to Trump's speech. They got carried away, and they invaded the Capitol. It was not an insurrection. They didn't kill anybody. They didn't plan on overthrowing the government. They left for the Capitol before Trump had even finished his speech. So this is one of those things for the Democrats that the narrative is just too good to spend too much time with the facts. You know, there was a riot in the Capitol on January 6th. Trump gave a speech. Therefore, let's blame Trump for the riot at the Capitol, and then let's really demagogue it up. You know, it looks like it could be the end of our democracy. It's the worst thing that's happened to our country since Pearl Harbor in September 11, 2001. On and on and on and on and on. So they're milking this one. Are you listening, Governor? They're milking this one for all of the headlines that they can get. But it's going to turn out like the Russian collusion that they were all hanging on Trump. It just wasn't there. So good for you, Kevin McCarthy. Stand by your guns. Next on the card, I've got McConnell versus Brandon. And McConnell tears into Biden's Atlanta speech. Incoherent, incorrect, and beneath his office. I caught parts of it, and I certainly agree. Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell tore into President Biden's speech advocating a suspension of filibuster rules in remarks on the Senate floor on Wednesday. The president's rant yesterday was incoherent, incorrect, and beneath his office, McConnell said. Biden gave a speech at Morehouse College in Atlanta on Tuesday in an attempt to drum up support for suspending filibuster rules in order to pass voting legislation. McConnell blasted the speech as a demagogic attempt to cast Republicans as racists over their opposition to federalizing elections. And it's so clear, you know, for the Republicans, it's election integrity. And the same things are described as by Democrats as, oh, that's voter suppression. You know, if we do these things, if we put in place all these things that the Republicans want to put in place, a person's only going to be able to vote once in an election. That's voter suppression. The president repeatedly invoked the January 6th riot while himself using irresponsible, delegitimizing rhetoric that undermines our democracy, McConnell continued. The sitting president of the United States compared American states, that would be the 50, to totalitarian states. That would be countries like Russia or China or North Korea. So the world saw our commander-in-chief propagandize against his own country to a degree that would have made Pravda blush. Talking about Pravda, it was the leading news, it was the government newspaper during the Soviet Union days, the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics. It was a nationwide, state-run newspaper. The word Pravda is in Russian language word for truth, probably the only truth in communist union at the time. Pravda. But, while we're talking about Pravda and Soviet Union, etc., what we have is what used to be referred to when the Soviets did it as a show trial. Everybody knows what the result is going to be before we even start. But you've got to put on this really good show. It's kind of like going to the circus to watch this really good show. And that's where we are with that January 6th committee. McConnell decried Biden's rhetoric as painting millions of voters and a majority of the Senate as racist. A president shouting that 52 senators and millions of Americans are racist unless he gets whatever he wants is proving exactly why the framers built the Senate, to check his power, McConnell said. This whole display is best possible argument for preserving the Senate rules that extend deliberation, force bipartisan compromise, and let cooler heads prevail. I couldn't agree more. What we're talking about here is the filibuster. And in the rules of the Senate, in order for a bill to advance on the floor, there has to be a sign-off by at least 60 members of the Senate. If 60 members of the Senate don't go with it, it can't go to the floor. Now, there's an exception called reconciliation, which is used for the budget. And, of course, the filibuster rule, like any other rule, can be modified or revoked or repealed. So what Biden and the Democrats are talking about, they're talking about we'll call a session and we'll make a motion to revoke the filibuster rule and we'll bring it to a vote. And of course they'll lose because all 50 Republicans will vote against it and 2 Democrats will vote against it, Sinema and Manchin, and it won't go anywhere. Which is good. I mentioned this before, with the Senate and the House having different approaches to the lawmaking process. The Senate is supposed to be a little bit more deliberate. The House a little bit more responsive to the electorate because it is proportionate to the population in the states. The Senate is a key part of federalism where each of the semi-sovereign states has its own representation in the Senate, 2 members, etc. And with the filibuster, members of the Senate are compelled to try to work things out with the other party. If it weren't for that, if it were straight majority rule, you'd wind up with some people winning and some people losing and some people being very, very disappointed. The Senate has for 160 years worked on trying to arrive at compromise and consensus. You don't get to consensus with a majority vote. Consensus means you have arrived at a solution that perhaps no one is crazy about, but that everybody can live with. So doing away with the filibuster would be a really bad move. And, of course, the Democrats by now should realize that they did it before and were hoist with their own petard. when they did away with the filibuster for judicial appointments. And then the Republicans did away with the filibuster for Supreme Court appointments. And I suspect that the Democrats are now saying we should never do that again, you know.
Until they lose both houses in 2024.
Exactly. Yeah, so it's a classic case of what goes around comes around, or as the mayor of Molesso said, what's sauce for the goose, what's good for the goose is good for the gander. All right, let's head for Wrigley Field here.
The Extra Point with Jerry Roberts of Guam Training.
Hi, I'm Jerry Roberts, and every day on The Ray Gibson Show, I get to comment on the incredibly diverse, fun, challenging, sometimes frustrating, often exciting, but always interesting world of work. I hope you'll be there with us.
You can find daily transcripts of The Extra Point at guamtraining.com. Tune in every weekday morning at 7:20 for The Extra Point with Jerry Roberts. Brought to you by Guahan Insurance Services and First Hawaiian Bank on 93.3 The Point.
Is it time to sell a new car? Nope, it's time to sell a used car from Nissan Guam. They have what they refer to as certified pre-owned vehicle. Their used cars aren't just washed and then stuck on a lot. Nissan Guam carefully inspects and repairs each one inside out before it earns a spot in their certified pre-owned inventory. A full 32-point inspection is done. Vehicles undergo repairs and replacement of things like belts, air filters, coolant, transmission fluid, engine oil, plenty of stuff. And once they're up to their roadworthy standards, then they're fully detailed inside and out. You know, I pity the guy that has to detail mine, because there's sand everywhere. There's sand and receipts and all kinds of other stuff. Used car manager Marlon Laxon prices the vehicles below Kelly Blue Book. They've got a diverse inventory, and you're sure to find the perfect used car for your lifestyle and budget. For the complete inventory, go online at nissanguam.com.
So here we are, Wrigley Field in Chicago, the world's most beautiful ballpark. And we've got just 2 more innings here for the Tall Tales, 7th inning stretch at Wrigley Field. And I'm going to go into some items that have been on the card for a long time and that I couldn't get to, starting out with the left versus the Constitution. And this is an article that's from my friend Jonathan Turley. And it's entitled, Aggressively Individualistic, Miami Law Professor Proposes a Redo of the First and Second Amendments. We've been discussing the growing attack on free speech in this country, including a widespread movement in academia to curtail free speech rights. Indeed, this movement largely began on college campuses and spread to social media, politics, and journalism. It's now an article of faith for the left to demand censorship or regulation of speech in the name of social justice. University of Miami's Marianne Frank says a simple solution, and the Boston Globe wants people to consider it. Just gut the First and Second Amendments. That's right. The problem with the Bill of Rights, according to Franks, is that it's too aggressively individualistic. Yeah. So the solution is to redo the work of the framers to be more woke compliant. All of those pesky constitutional rulings in favor of free speech rights will then fall away and society can move on with social justice unimpeded by constitutional niceties. Franks is the Michael R. Klein Distinguished Scholar Chair at Miami and the author of The Cult of the Constitution, Our Deadly Devotion to Guns and Free Speech. Now, I got to explain here that Marianne Franks is what's called an academic. Now, she may be a law professor, but she's also an academic. A little explanation about what being an academic means. The highest rank for an academic is the PhD, Doctor of Philosophy, which really means love of philosophy, love of learning. So in order to have a PhD, in order to have a Doctor of Philosophy, it's a research degree, and there's a rather difficult process that the candidate goes through, putting together his thesis for his dissertation, and he has to go out and gather and do research and then write it up, and if it's satisfactory, he will become a PhD. Lawyers, you know, most lawyers go to trade school. That's where I went. I went to a trade school, not an academic institution. Now, lawyers and law professors do write law review articles, which are somewhat scholarly, but they're not held to the same standards as the papers that PhDs write. You can be an advocate in a law review article that you perhaps couldn't in a dissertation. But ironically, there are academic degrees that some lawyers achieve. When a person graduates from law school, nowadays he's awarded the Juris Doctor. So I never call myself doctor. I don't have a little black bag. I don't have a stethoscope, etc. I don't carry any pills around. But the research degrees for lawyers, there are actually two, and the top is called the Doctor of the Science of Jurisprudence, a JSD. So in order to get a JSD, a lawyer has to go through the same hoops that a PhD would have to go through in an academic discipline. The other scholarly degree is the Master of Comparative Law. So the Masters of Comparative Law is a higher degree than the Doctor of Jurisprudence. Leave it to the lawyers to screw things like that up. So these academics, you know, sometimes have some really crazy ideas. And I suspect the reason is that they have crazy ideas is that the thin air at the top of the ivory tower doesn't allow their brains to function fully. They get altitude sickness.
The air is thin up there.
Yeah, at the top of the ivory tower. So the Boston Globe column echoes her long-standing contempt for the two rights and the Bill of Rights. Her redo is enough to put George Mason into catatonic shock. George Mason, one of the founding fathers. There's a university named after George in the District of Columbia.
Virginia. It's George Mason University.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's in D.C.?
Is it D.C. or Virginia? I'm not sure. I've been there. I can't remember. Probably D.C.
It's in that area.
Yeah. And the Antonin Scalia School of Law is located at George Mason University. And here's a quote. The First and Second Amendments tend to be interpreted in aggressively individualistic ways that ignore the reality of conflict among competing rights. This, in turn, allows the most powerful members of society to reap the benefits of these constitutional rights at the expense of vulnerable groups. This all sounds pretty familiar, doesn't it, Jose? Yeah. Both amendments would be improved by explicitly situating individual rights within the framework of domestic tranquility and general welfare set out in the Constitution's preamble. Franks would entirely gut the free speech protections under the First Amendment that have long defined this country. She would instead amplify the right of government to hold people accountable for speech deemed harmful. Every person has the right to freedom of expression, association, peaceful assembly, and petition the government for redress of grievances consistent with the rights of others to the same and subject to responsibility for abuses. That's how she would change it. Other freedoms fare little better. Indeed, the amendment is rewritten to guarantee equity over individual rights. Every person has the right to freedom of expression, association, peaceful assembly, and petition the government for redress of grievances consistent with the rights of others to the same and subject to responsibility for abuses. All conflicts of such rights shall be resolved in accordance with the principle of equity and dignity of all persons. Yeah. As for the Second Amendment, she would just replace the right to bear arms with the right to abortion and personal autonomy. All people have the right to bodily autonomy consistent with the right of other people to the same, including the right to defend themselves against unlawful force and the right of self-determination in reproductive matters. Did you ever think when you hear me reading the Second Amendment at the beginning of the show that it had anything to do with abortion?
None whatsoever.
The government shall take reasonable measures to protect the health and safety of the public as a whole. The government, yeah. As chilling as the Boston Globe column may be, it does serve a useful purpose. It acknowledges the anti-free speech agenda of many in academia and journalism today. As liberal academics took effective control of faculties and schools, the support for free speech and academic freedom waned. A new orthodoxy took hold that has continued to build on our campuses. I discuss that trend in my forthcoming law review article, Harm and Hegemony, the Decline of Free Speech in the United States. The writings of Franks and others are enormously popular because they legitimate such orthodoxy in the anti-free speech movement. Most intellectuals have grown weary and impatient with free speech. What is most striking about Frank's proposal is that it's hardly new. Indeed, such a qualified right was made part of the Declaration of the Rights of Man and Citizen, Article 11, drafted in part by the Marquis de Lafayette. And it stated, free communication of ideas and opinions is one of the most precious rights of man. Every citizen may accordingly speak, write, and print with freedom, but shall be responsible for such abuses of this freedom as shall be defined by law. Product of the French Revolution. The First Amendment was written, as correctly noted by Professor Franks, as a more robust individualistic protection. It was elegant and powerful in its simplicity. Congress shall make no law abridging the freedom of speech. Indeed, that clarity famously inspired Justice Hugo Black to declare, I take no law abridging to mean no law abridging. It's aggressively individualistic, as were many of the framers. That's precisely why Professor Franks and many in academia want the right extracted from the Constitution. Once this protection is removed by a constitutional amendment or judicial interpretation, The real work can begin on recreating a society in a better government-approved and government-enforced image. The aggressively individualistic model of the Bill of Rights can be replaced with an aggressively collective model of the Bill of Responsibilities and Penalties. Shirley says, I have long admitted to being a dinosaur on free speech. I support the free speech rights of those who espouse views that I find deeply hurtful and offensive. I still believe that the solution to bad speech is better speech, not censorship or sanctions. The growing wave of speech intolerance on our campuses and in society has left many of us in a shrinking minority. To make matters worse, many professors are too intimidated to speak out. To do so is to risk everything that intellectuals hold dear, from publication offers to speaking opportunities to their very academic positions. The result is a generation that is being taught in an echo chamber where free speech is treated as a scourge or a tool of oppression. That is the ultimate irony in all of this. Liberals often lament the McCarthy period, the other McCarthy, Joe McCarthy, for its crackdown on speech and blacklisting of leftist academics and writers. Well, it wasn't McCarthy, it was the House Un-American Activities Committee that did that. But what difference does it make? Senator Joe McCarthy was probably never in the House of Representatives.
And he was a Republican.
And he was a Republican from guess which state? The Badger State.
Oh, no kidding.
This is the hand that shook the hand of Joe McCarthy. Yeah. A good Wisconsin man.
Did he ask you if your shirt was red?
And we didn't get into those technicalities in those days. Faculty and editors are actively supporting modern versions of book burnings with blacklists and bans of those with opposing views. Columbia Journalism School Dean Steve Cole has denounced the weaponization of free speech, which appears to be use of free speech by those on the right. Through a combination of corporate censorship, government pressure, and media controls, they have succeeded in silencing many who would challenge them. It was only a matter of time before someone like Professor Franks cut to the chase and called for the First Amendment to be discarded as the final measure of devotion to the cause. Now, this all sounds, kind of far away and kind of like something that, well, it's interesting, but how is it ever going to affect me? It will. Because the way things work in a society, the culture changes first, and then the laws catch up with the culture. And folks, and of course the Frankfurt School guys knew this, the culture is often influenced dramatically by institutions of higher learning, universities, university professors. So when you have crackpot university professors like this mouthing off about doing away with the First Amendment and finding a right to abortion in the Second Amendment, it's serious, and it's something we should all take an interest in. Right now, the only thing I could offer you is continue following up on Tall Tales, be a tailgater so you'll know what's going on. That's about the best I can do for you right now. Maybe later on we'll come up with a better idea. Okay, let's take a short break here, and we'll head for Churchill Downs.
Get a box of Post or Kellogg's cereal for only 99 cents when you fuel up on $35 or more of mid-grade or premium high-performance fuel. Conditions apply. See store for details. Get a 75-ounce bottle of Dawn dish soap for only $5.95 when you fuel up on $35 or more of mid-grade or premium high-performance fuel. Conditions apply. See store for details. Get a Bounty paper towel 2-pack for only 99 cents when you fuel up on $35 or more of mid-grade or premium high-performance fuel. Conditions apply. See store for details. Circle K. Take it easy.
Come try Guam's original Chamorro restaurant with Pica's Best 5 years running. Mezcla Chamorro Fusion Bistro. Experience Chef Peter's candied salmon over scallion coconut rice, octopus to naktak, Chamorro platter, and their award-winning gourmet hamburgers. Or if you're looking for something healthy, try their keto-friendly menu. Come and enjoy Mezcla's half-a-day service at their Hagåtña and Grand Plaza Tumon location. Call their Hagåtña location at 479-2652 for reservations.
Yeah, here we go. Churchill Downs, Louisville, Kentucky. Six more furlongs, and I'll cross the finish line for another episode of Tall Tales. And Jose tells me that George Mason University is located in Fairfax, Virginia. Seems right.
Which is Nova, which is outside D.C.
Okay. Okay, next item on the card is my friend Turley again. Turley versus Tribe. Now, Lawrence Tribe is one of these really famous academics, hard left. And as you'll see when I get into this article, Professor Lawrence Tribe has lashed out at conservatives for years, claiming that disinformation is a Republican tool that prefigures the advent of fascist authoritarianism and the death of liberty. I'll read that sentence again. Disinformation is a Republican tool that prefigures the advent of fascist authoritarianism and the death of liberty. Now, I hear that word authoritarianism tossed around a lot. The left tries to hang it on Republicans. I can't remember ever seeing more authoritarianism in our country than we have right now since Joe Biden was elected president. And the only thing that saves us is that he is an authoritarian. He's just not very good at what he does. If he were a capable individual, we'd be in a world of hurt. Well, Tribe has been repeatedly criticized for false statements and conspiracy theories. Newspapers continue to run dubious takes on the law and politics. However, there is a clear line between false and frivolous claims. The latter problem was brought to my attention by readers who noted that Tribe made a false claim about my prior writings. This is Jonathan Turley. Man, I would never even think of that, doing that. The Tribe column claimed hypocrisy for a column in which I took the very opposite and consistent position on the Texas abortion law. Tribe also used the alleged hypocrisy to embrace his own hypocritical position on the laws. It's enough to give you vertigo. This week, the Boston Globe published a column by Lawrence Tribe, Jonathan Metze, and David Hogg. You remember David Hogg? Yeah. Entitled, Democrats Should Apply Supreme Court's Abortion Decision to Firearms. Metze directs the Department of Medicine, Health, and Society at Vanderbilt University. Hogg is a student at Harvard College who became an advocate for gun control after the Parkland high school shootings. The entire premise of the article is that California Governor Gavin Newsom was brilliant to propose using the same type of law against gun rights, and people condemning such copycat legislation are hypocrites. The key line on the latter point is, quote, commentators on the right who only weeks ago championed a similar approach for ending abortion now hypocritically cry foul when the topic turns to saving lives from gunfire. The link of hypocrites crying foul is to one of my columns. If you were looking at this, the words cry foul are a link to one of Turley's columns. I have written and spoken on the Texas abortion law extensively and have uniformly maintained that the law is facially unconstitutional. Now, a little explanation here. A statute can be facially unconstitutional sometimes, or it can be unconstitutional as applied. Facially unconstitutional means you look at it and you say, there's no way that this one can work. Something like, I'm going to use a real case here for unconstitutional as apply. But if a statute said, no Chinese shall open a laundry in San Francisco, you know that's facially unconstitutional, right? So there was a real case called Yik Wo versus Hopkins that arose in San Francisco, where the majority of the laundries were run by people of the Chinese ancestry. And the statute was put together in such a manner that it would have closed most of the Chinese laundries. Sanitary requirements, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. It's pretty much tailored to close the Chinese laundries. Unconstitutional as applied. Okay, the entire premise, let's see. Turley says, I have written and spoken on the Texas abortion law extensively and uniformly maintained that the law is facially unconstitutional. Now, this is the law that does not require a public official to do anything to enforce an anti-abortion statute in Texas, but it would provide a reward of $10,000 for anyone who brought suit against an abortionist in Texas. So, and Turley says it's facially unconstitutional. In the column cited by Tribe, I repeated that view while also condemning the California law. The problem is multifold. First, the Texas law was quickly found to be unconstitutional by the district court, as would the California law. Indeed, many of us declared the law as facially unconstitutional under existing precedent on the day that it was enacted. That means that while there are litigation costs, those costs would decrease quickly as other courts declare challenges to be unconstitutional. I have also discussed the law on television and radio programs and criticized provisions like the bar on recovering attorney's fees and the law's jurisdictional rules. While the law was clever in its use of private attorneys general, I predicted that it would be quickly declared unconstitutional, as a district court did. What is most striking about the Boston Globe column is that all this is required for sourcing is that all that is required for sourcing is for someone to hit the link and read the column. They would have seen that the column states the opposite in condemning both laws. Sounds like Balakwa and Manny Cruz, right? I have been a national columnist and television analyst for decades, and it's not uncommon to have my work criticized. Indeed, both Professor Tribe and I have discussed each other's evolution in areas related to impeachment. Tribe, however, often attacks others in vulgar and personal terms. Tribe's Twitter account has been described by critics as a vector of misinformation and conspiracy theories on Twitter, where he regularly engages in vulgar attacks on people upholding opposing views. To its credit, the Boston Globe issued a correction to the Tribe article. Quote, correction. An earlier version of this column incorrectly included a link to a column by George Washington University Law School professor Jonathan Turley as an example of those who champion the Texas abortion law but oppose the California firearms initiative. Turley has voiced misgivings on both. The column has been corrected and updated with a new link. The irony is that Tribe was citing a column that did not treat the laws differently as an excuse to adopt a clearly hypocritical position in his own column. He and his co-authors added, "It's ironic that the path of the Supreme Court is open for those urgently concerned to reduce gun deaths involves a new breed of civil lawsuit, but irony has no reason to retain from lawful options the court has now made available. The problem is that the Supreme Court did not find that this was a lawful option. It only declined to issue an injunction on law that was previously declared unconstitutional." We've covered all of these things here on Tall Tales, the Supreme Court shadow docket, the Texas law's approach to stopping abortion in Texas. It's been pretty effective so far, the possible constitutionality of such a statute. So now we have two law professors slinging brickbats at one another over that very statute. So I think it's time for me to wrap up the show for today by saying, let's go, Brandon.
The Point is KUSG, Hagåtña, Guam, 93.3 FM and 104.3 HD3.
I'm Carmen Roberts, Fox News. House Republican leader Kevin McCarthy says the House committee investigating the Capitol riot can forget about him testifying.
The House Select Committee is asking House Republican leader Kevin McCarthy to provide records and answer questions for the panel about his communications with former President Trump before and after the riot. The request is voluntary. It is not a subpoena. Other House Republicans asked to voluntarily cooperate with the committee have so far declined. Jared Halpern, Fox News.
If you've bought anything recently, you know inflation is soaring. Prices rose nearly 7% last month compared to a year ago. That's the fastest pace in nearly 40 years.
People waiting for prices to go down are going to have to wait a while because White House officials are saying that prices are going to moderate over the course of 2022.
Fox's Peter Ducey. The Biden administration plans to distribute millions of free COVID tests to schools around the country as it tries to keep them open while the Omicron variant